Hey everyone, my name is Rooster, and welcome back to Mechabellum, and welcome to the very first video where I'll be covering some viewer games at different MMRs. And today it is going to be all about Mr. Allright, who is up against Mr. Grumpy. This game takes place at around 1300, 1350 MMR, so right about in the mid-range, I'd say, of the MMR. And Allright decides to pick for sledgehammers and hounds. He is a giant specialist. His opponent has hounds and Mustang with a training specialist. Now, this is a very bad pack, generally speaking. Now, of course, Mr. Grumpy does get a bunch of hit points with it, and he has the intensive training, which can help with the hound opener. But the problem with hound and Mustang is that both units tend to struggle with crawlers if they don't have levels, and neither unit really provides enough DPS to be able to deal with any big targets. So I would say here, Allright has a pretty decent matchup, and especially if you're giant spec, here you should just be looking immediately to try and work your way towards Vulcan. Of course, in the early game here, you don't have any chaff, really, so you should buy the crawlers, which is what Allright does. I like the setup here, symmetrical, you're pretty fine doing this. Maybe the sledgehammers could be a little bit more towards the middle. That way you ensure that this sledgehammer pack would get pulled towards the center and help out in case your opponent plays asymmetrical. They do play asymmetrical somewhat, but they go for this late Mustang on the right side. I don't think you should do this. I think if you have a Mustang opener, better to stack them, gives you better odds, and they kind of make up for the weakness of a single Mustang pack not being the greatest at dealing with, you know, basically anything in the early game. Still, left side is going to do well here. The sledgehammers on the right side got kind of isolated, and we have the level hound advantage as well, of course. From the training spec, that would be correct play, in my opinion. Leveling hounds early is often going to be very good. Allows you to get past that crawler breakpoint, and, well, we should get a round win here for Mr. Grumpy, but it's going to be very, very close. The tricky part here, I guess, for Mr. Allright is he started with sledgehammers and hounds, and both sledgehammers and hounds are kind of chaff clear, hound more so than sledgehammer, but you might get tricked into not wanting to buy chaff clear because you're also lacking DPS, right? You bought your chaff with your crawlers on round 1, but you don't really have anti-air, that type of stuff. And so you think, oh, but I should just maybe use my sledgehammers and my hounds as my main form of chaff clear. And sometimes that may work, but I think that in these type of scenarios, when you're giant spec, when your opponent's entire board essentially consists of chaff, right? Hounds, crawlers, Mustang, units that come in relatively large packs with relatively few hit points per unit, you should just try and get you into Vulcan. And that is very doable here with Giant Specialist, right? Don't get too worked up about, ooh, I would have like almost 3 different chaff clear units. You don't need to tech into the hounds, into the sledgehammers. Sledgehammers and hounds also can double down as a form of chaff later on, right? They've got this mid-sized unit pack of 5 units, and they're a little bit more tanky than something like a crawler. They will do very well into things like sabers or melting points, whatever it may be, and they can kind of frontline eventually for your Vulcan plus whatever you want to pair with your Vulcan. But that would be my recommendation here. And that is immediately where I guess my first tip kind of comes in, right? This is a bit of a matchup-based tip because you need to know, hey, my opponent has a bunch of small units. I need to get chaff clear, which is often going to be your early game anyway. But here we have a bit of a problem, I guess, where we go for a Mustang. Now, the reason that we go Mustang is because Wasp Swarm was offered, and you do need to play around that. I just wouldn't necessarily pick it myself. Allright here picks the Wasp Swarm and goes for a Mustang on top of it to really try and cover all of the bases, which is fine, but I wouldn't buy Wasp Swarm to try and threaten someone who started with Mustang. So you're really only buying it to defend, and then you're doubling down by, you know, buying an actual unit that deals with wasps as well. That is a big turn to deal with a single spell, and it doesn't really help you at all into the enemy board, because buying Mustang here is not great. Let's be real. Mustang is not good into crawler. It's, I guess, fine into enemy Mustang, but you really would like something that counters Mustang rather than, you know, buy the same unit. And Mustang isn't very good into Hound either because your opponent has got armor enhancement available. So this is a bit of a tempo loss round because your opponent, you know, just buys one Wasp Swarm and might overwhelm you with it, and they get a lot of response out of you and kind of delay other things you might need. So what should you have done here? I think that buying the Mustang is too much. Yes, you need anti-air at some point, but it might be way better to just grab that Wasp Swarm and then go for some different type of anti-air here, right? You can buy Fangs if you really, really want to, but honestly, I wouldn't even bother going for dedicated anti-air. I would just hope that my Wasp clear the enemy Wasps. Your opponent doesn't really threaten any anti-air or any air units in the long run here. So, you know, just kind of tank it and try and, you know, make your board better. Another thing is sell, right? Buy the sell button early on here. You don't need your buildings in all places. The left one is quite useful because it's good at clearing things like crawlers. The right one you can get rid of. That right side, that's a lot of units not doing a bunch for you, right? They're just running into the enemy tower. They're not pressuring quickly because they're relatively slow units. It's a lot better here to try and recover your resources and start stabilizing the weak side of your board that is getting pushed by almost the entire enemy army. Now, you do win here, right? Because we invested a Mustang, but the rest of the board didn't get much stronger as a result. And so now we're having to deal with all of these Hounds, these Mustang. Opponent goes for a Crawler and a Marksman. I wouldn't say that's the strongest round either. But it should be maybe enough in this case to be able to win. And yeah, I think we will see a victory. So the board here didn't get a lot stronger on the side of Allright. It also didn't get that much stronger on the side of Grumpy. It was a bit of a back and forth between that Wasp Swarm, you know, being the star of the show, I think, in terms of decision making. And yeah, we're going to head into round number 3 with both players still relatively healthy. Now, again here, I would recommend trying to get into that Vulcan as fast as possible, right? We went for a Mustang. That's completely fine. We have that now, so we have our anti-air. It's not, I think, my preferred anti-air, but it'll do the job. And at the very least, now that we have these show up, right, the unit drops, that Wasp isn't as threatening anymore. If we didn't have the Mustang, maybe we would have had to buy it here to be able to deal with it. So I guess it all works out in the end. And now we can try and focus on something else. There is a Phantom Ray here, which I don't mind too much. I think, again, though, you're just trying to, like, make use of your Giant Spec and get into that Vulcan. So nothing here screams, oh, that's fantastic to me. The Wasp gets countered by the Mustang. The Phantom Ray, I think, is the best. You can try and, you know, play aggressively here. You can even put it on the left side, right in front of your Mustang, to kind of try and bully that left side a bit. Because of its air tankiness, it can be hard to take down for Mustangs. The Void Eyes, I don't really like as much here because we have a bit too much of mid-sized unit at that point, right? Then we're stacking Sledges upon Hounds upon Void Eyes. You're screaming to get Raidened, is the main concern. Same thing with Steel Ball. Steel Ball just not good into crawlers and small units in general. So I would just pick whatever is worth selling, which in this case would be the Steel Balls if you're okay selling across 2 turns, or the Phantom Ray, which is a bit easier to sell in a singular round, and start getting into that Vulcan. For the opponent here, he could go for something like Steel Ball. That makes sense, I guess, as a frontline unit for Mustang. Alternative options could have been the Phantom Ray, honestly, because we don't have a lot of anti-air, and even the Wasp here is pickable to try and go for an aggressive play on the right side if they desired, which is kind of what you want to do if you're aggro, right? Try and make your opponent, the defender, uncomfortable. Don't let them do what they want to do, which would have been buy a Vulcan. But Allright goes for a different line, which is to buy sledgehammers and immediately tech them. Now, on the surface level, there isn't anything like very wrong about this. Sledgehammers are good into things like Mustang and Hound, and honestly, they're good into steel balls as well. But they're not the greatest chaff clear unit, and you're somewhat breaking like one of the rules of thumb I have about the game, which is that generally speaking, you do not want to commit techs early, apart from range on your main chaff clear unit. That tends to be the only thing that happens by round 4. You kind of just play for chaff clear, especially in a game like this where chaff clear is kind of the whole name of the game, right? And here you're going for sledgehammers. Now, the field maintenance does provide additional tankiness, which is nice, and you do crush the round, but it's very early to commit to, right? You're kind of showing your hand on a committal tech for sledgehammer, and sledgehammers are pretty easily counterable, right? Raiden, Scorpion, that type of thing. Now we get efficient giant manufacturing, which is a bit scary, but there's a bunch of other good cards to pick. Both of them go efficient giants. You could go for ion beam there as well, but I mean, we are a giant spec, so why not pick this? I think it's a bit of a toss-up. I don't mind efficient giants. Keep in mind that this card often looks better than it is. You need to get 4 giants to make 50 profit. That's quite a lot of giants. You can get there if you're a giant spec, but you know, realistically, you're not going to be buying more than 5-ish giants usually. I say usually. So it's perfectly acceptable here to pick the Ion Blast and just say, you know, that card isn't going to give me that much more resources. And Ion Blast, I'm likely going to see back when it shows up this early. But both go for the efficient giant, and yeah, right on cue, we have the Raiden show up. Now, this is something that is predictable, because we are very heavily invested as this Vulcan drops out of the sky in mid-sized units, right? You kind of have to look at your board and say, what is the weakness that I have? Or what would my opponent do? And in this case, we have sledges, we have hounds, we picked the Void Eyes, and, well, we're just, you know, we're asking to get Raidened and or Scorpioned. Those are kind of the 2 units that you should expect to show up. Now, the opponent, right, goes Raiden because we don't have a lot of anti-air in this scenario. That was going to be a weakness of ours anyway, but we only have 1 Mustang. And yeah, Raiden here is very threatening because it both deals with ground and it punishes our lack of anti-air. So it creates two like problems immediately. And now we buy Vulcan. Now, I would say that that is correct because we wanted a Vulcan anyway, right? Opponent has, again, crawlers, hounds, steel balls without armor, Mustangs. None of this is threatening for Vulcan. There is armor on the hound, but I would generally say that if you're giant spec and you can get into Vulcan early, armor should not be a concern. If you're running Scorching Fire, you will be fine. It's very rare for Vulcans to not be able to kill armored hounds unless you're down a ton of levels and you have no additional DPS to help you out. But the tricky thing here is that we're now really starting to double down on chaff a bit too much in the early game, and it's putting us behind in other areas of the game, right? Notably, the DPS portion and the anti-air DPS portion of our composition. We now have sledgehammers, which are tanks, and also were our main source of chaff clear up to now. We have hounds, which are chaff and somewhat chaff clear. We have chaff, which, you know, is almost all units also on our board. And we have Mustang, which is also chaff clear and somewhat chaff. We don't have DPS. And the Vulcan, it provides a nice tank, and it is going to be the most solid chaff clear unit we can have down the line. But, you know, we might struggle dealing with something like this Raiden. So, here we go. And we buy another Void Eye. So, I would say that generally speaking, right, you have to try and diversify your board a little bit more so that you shore up any weaknesses and you don't get punished really hard by a single unit commit from your opponent. Ideally, you do not give your opponent a 2-for-1 or a 3-for-1, right? Where they can buy a Raiden, punish your sledges, your hounds, your Void Eyes, and your lack of anti-air in one go. That puts you in an awkward spot. Now, it's completely recoverable from this position. Absolutely it is. But ideally, you don't put yourself in that position in the first place. And I think the easiest way to do that is not commit to a tank tech early and try and make your use of your specialist, right? Try and just go for Vulcan. So that would be, I guess, so far kind of the theme of the early game, which is a bit matchup based and your specialist based in this case. And then I guess the other part would be don't be afraid of selling, which is something that I have seen a lot at not just the mid-levels, the very beginning, you know, portions of the ladder as well for people that just started out. It can be hard to locate the field recovery button and know what to sell, but selling stuff is very useful. You can get rid of units that aren't doing a lot, right? We pumped a level into this sledgehammer on the right side early on. It's not doing that much, right? It's getting a tower debuff eventually, but I don't think it's worth getting a level into that unless your opponent is showing interest in pushing over there and you need the additional stats, which right now you don't really need. You need the stats on this side of the board. Thankfully, we have crushed the left side. That Vulcan did fantastic. It tanked for the sledgehammers, and the Mustangs managed to somehow survive here, so we will end up on top. So on face value, this looks great. Compositionally speaking, though, again, right, we kind of got away with this because of tempo techs, right? We won around because of field maintenance on sledgehammers. That is not a tech that skills very well, typically. We win around here because we make good use of our specialist and we use our Vulcan to tank. Right? It's in front of the sledgehammers, I imagine here, because Allright didn't want his sledgehammers to get targeted by the RAIDEN, which makes sense. But the one downside to this is that your Vulcan is very exposed, right? Typically, in this scenario, you would have your Vulcan be a little bit further back so that it gets protected by your chaff. And you don't have to like add a whole bunch of stuff up here, because the way that you positioned is all your stuff is back here. And when you're limited in deployments, it's not going to be easy for you to add a whole bunch of stuff up here as well and have all of the stuff back there. Like, that's just not, right? The game, you only get 2 deployments per round, maybe 3 if you additionally deploy. So ideally, have your units work together, because again, this is somewhat of a one-turn thing. If your opponent gets a melting point, your Vulcan is extremely exposed and likely will die. So I think here, even if, yes, the sledgehammers are in a rough spot because of the enemy RAIDEN, put the Vulcan a little bit further back, right? Put it just in front of the tower. That's usually a safe spot for Vulcans to be in 99% of scenarios, and work together with the units that you already have. Now, on round number 5, we get super heavy armor as an insta-pick. I don't mind this. There is super heavy, or super supply, next to super heavy as well. I think super supply round 4, if you're both on 4,000 hit points, must pick. On round 5, still good, because you're both very healthy. The game will likely go long, but you can make a case for skipping it in this scenario and go for super heavy if you feel like the tempo is worth it. So I have no particular issues with this, this purchase. Sledgehammers are getting levels. You can do that. The thing is, you kind of have to look at what your opponent have, right? Generally speaking, it is good to level the units that are doing a lot for you in the game. So typically, this is going to be your main chaff clear unit and your main DPS unit. Sledgehammers, in most cases, are not going to be that, right? If they're tanking very well and your opponent is not responding to them, by all means, keep leveling them. If your opponent already has a level 2 RAIDEN, likely don't level them, because they're still going to get one shot, 9,000 hit points versus 11,000 damage, but they're going to give away 3 times the experience of a level 1 unit here, which means that your RAIDEN on the opposing side is going to level even more, and you already have the intensive training to deal with as well. So don't level that unit here, right? Your sledgehammers are abandoned, basically. All they do now is hopefully tank a couple shots from Mustangs, Hounds, whatever, clear a few crawlers. Your focus should be on the Vulcans and using your specialist. In this case, you decide to range the Mustang, which I think is completely fine. Mustangs want range anyway if you decide to keep them. But yeah, I wouldn't like level sledgehammers at this point. You could even, again, start selling, Selling here is completely acceptable. You can get rid of one of the sledgehammer packs. This one in specific, right? Just keep the 2. That's okay. But start reinvesting some of your money into other stuff. Again, this right side building 2 isn't doing a whole lot for you. Better to get that field recovery and have it available. Because you might get a unit drop, for instance, that you don't really want. And you can only sell one thing a turn. Again, here, though, we're going to do relatively well. Opponent goes for another Raiden. Raidens can be a bit slow to get going, and that is exactly what we see here. Now, the level 2 is starting to do a good amount of damage, though, but the super heavy play works out fine. Do keep in mind, opponent put themselves behind, right? They invested in super supply, so we are meant to win this round. Otherwise, we'd be in trouble. And now round number 6, we have unit reinforcements. We have Fortress, Saber, Phantom Ray, and Scorpion. None of these look good for us. Fortress doesn't do anything into all of these small units. It's not meant to battle that type of thing. It does tank well, but that's about the extent of it. Sabertooth, same thing. Sabertooth is basically just a smaller version of a Fortress. Scorpion, also kind of same thing. Scorpion is all right into Hound, but Hound alone is not enough of a reason to get Scorpion with how expensive they are and how slow they shoot, and they're terrible into flying units. So yeah, none of that. And obviously, Phantom Ray gets countered by Raiden. So we don't want any of this. We want to sell. The field recovery here is another big theme once again, right? If you can use unit drops, absolutely, it's the best play. You will get the most tempo out of it. But sometimes you simply don't get that. And when you don't, you use the resources to get into something different. In this case, right, we still have Giant Spec, and we picked Efficient Giant Manufacturing. We can get into Melting Point. So my recommendation here would be to just sell. You can either take the Fortress and sell it for 400, or you can take the Scorpion and sell it across 2 turns for 500, whichever you want. I think I would probably pick the Scorpion, sell one, and then maybe go for a little bit of a play here on that right side of the field. You can try and pull these units and maybe go in for a little play with the Wasp Swarm. Do be a bit careful. There is a Wasp Swarm available. The right side is open, so maybe we want to have, you know, a Melting Point here on the left side, a Mustang, and we can use oil as well. I guess another thing that I haven't noticed, the right side tower is being ignored a bit too much here in the early game. I think field recovery, it is something that you should almost always purchase. Almost always. It's very rare that you need both of your buildings this long. And you can just sell a building to make up for the cost of field recovery. If you have it sitting around and you don't need it, that's fine. But if you have a sledgehammer that doesn't do much, you can recover those 200 resources and get a Vulcan level out of it. You can, not have to buy things like Void Eyes and keep them around. You can sell them and invest them into something that's going to do a better job of strengthening your composition. And yeah, oil is available. Fantastic spell for defense. It's really, really powerful. And the earlier you get it, the earlier it's going to come off cooldown and you're going to get to use it a second time. Very useful. Tower enhancements, very powerful. You don't need to get them as soon as possible, but ideally by round 5, you should have both. And now Mr. Grumpy does have both and you don't. Especially when you're into Hound. Keep in mind that crawlers, right, do not get one-shots by Hounds as long as you remember to click that defense enhancement. If you allow them to get the first attack enhancement, the level 1 Hounds kill the level 1 crawlers, and that makes it a lot easier for your opponent. So, big thing here, right? Right side tower, there are a bunch of useful things on there that you should get by round 5, by round 6, especially in these defensive games. Now, Allright decides to go for Scorpion, and the main idea here is to deal with the Hounds. Again, it's Allright, but I just wouldn't really care. I think the Vulcan by itself does good enough of a job, and the Scorpions are just not going to be that good into most of the drops. In fact, your opponent, right, goes for Saber, which is somewhat predictable here. Sabertooth is fantastic DPS, and it's very good into Scorpion. I have heard a lot of people say that they like using Scorpion against Saber, and it can work if you're into Scorpion already, but Scorpion isn't necessarily meant to deal with Saber. Sabertooth is a much more specialized DPS unit than Scorpion is, right? Doesn't have the splash, and so DPS per cost on this unit is way better than it is on a Scorpion, because you're overpaying for the splash, but you don't need splash to kill big units, right? So in this case, right, the level 2 sabers, especially being a level up, 17,000 damage, you're basically getting one shot if their sabers ever connect to your Scorpions. And the Scorpions only deal 10,000 damage every 4.5 seconds. That takes a while to get through 36,000 hit points worth of Sabertooth. That takes a really, really long time. So, you know, I wouldn't, like, bother trying to make these work here. They're just not worth the 600 resources, because the best thing they can shoot at is Hounds, and that's a 100 cost unit. So again, right, I really want to try and hammer down this point that sometimes you don't need to use the unit drops. In this case, it's much, much better to try and kind of preempt, right, your opponent going for Saber. But even if your opponent doesn't go Saber, grabbing melting points here is fantastic into Raiden. Raiden isn't that good into melting point unless it's very high level and has, you know, triple tech with EMP. But melting point can be exceptionally tanky. It levels very fast. Those levels make it even tankier. And Raiden is normally meant to deal with things like sledgehammers. Maybe, you know, low-level Scorpions, that type of thing. Not really meant to deal with high-level giants. That's more Overlord's job. So, yeah, I would say, you know, use the giant spec there. We do pick up the Mustang to try and deal with the Wasp Swarm. We're not really attacking the right side that much. I mean, we put a Crawler there, but then we don't substantiate the attack, right? This pull doesn't achieve anything. If it was over here, you could maybe argue it does something, because that's where the opponent is pushing in. So delaying them over there might give you an easier time. Notice, by the way, that these Scorpions are going down relatively quick, and they have maybe killed one Hound pack. Maybe. So really, like, was that worth 600 resources? I'm not too sure. The opponent's Saber, though, they're doing a pretty good job here, right? Almost 100,000 damage the round they came down. Opponent decided to go for field maintenance, trying to punish our DPS. I mean, I think that's just a correct play, right? We have been struggling kind of having DPS from the very get-go, and whilst Mustang can sometimes deal with Raiden, it's not very good at dealing with tankier units than that. And even Raiden, in general, I would be a bit careful trying to counter with Mustang, because once they get level 2, or even level 3, they become exceptionally hard to kill with only Mustangs as a counter. It can just take way, way, way too long. That's also why I would recommend trying to get into melting point here. So, great play from the opponent, right? Really, really focuses on that tankiness and goes for Armor Hound, Field Maintenance Saber. Now we're in a bit of trouble, right? This trend of having to put more units in front, right, of the Vulcan, trying to protect the Vulcan with more chaff, using the Scorpions, same thing here as well, right? Scorpions need protection as well, but all the protection is back there, which makes it tough, which is why the Scorpions die so fast, because this can't ever get in front of the Scorpions in time, and you're also not giving Scorpions space. Scorpion is a unit that likes range. It likes range because it's a very slow-firing unit. So it doesn't do very well in these high-pressure situations where the fight is over in 30 seconds. It's only going to get to fire a couple times, and the first shot is going to be into chaff. So you have to work around your unit's specialty. Again, in general, I wouldn't recommend playing Scorpion here. But if you are going to play it, same thing with the Vulcan, try and play a little bit further back, right? Help yourself out, and you have good chaff, you have good mid-sized units, but you gotta try and work with the timings of them and be mindful of the fact that you don't have infinite deployments. So round number 7, problems. We have some problems. We get a barrier, lovely item, great pickup if you're playing giants, and we go for another Vulcan here on the right side. Now, the main problem that we have here is killing big targets, right? Now, we try and fix that by going for the Mustang with the aerial specialization. And I guess here the idea is that if we can somehow protect the Scorpions for long enough by, adding more chaff and maybe clearing the enemy chaff a bit quicker, they can take down the Sabers. This is a bit of a knowledge thing, right? I just generally wouldn't recommend playing Scorpion into Saber. I think it's much better to try and play something else. Something like Phoenix or Melting Point or Overlord or Fortress. All of those units, I think, do better into Saber than Scorpion does. Of course, if you get a very high-level Scorpion, things are different. If your Scorpions are up a level on the enemy Sabers, yes, they're going to absolutely destroy them. But, you know, if both of them show up on the same round, and the Scorpions are level 1 and the Sabers are level 2, not great. This time around, though, the Chaff is dying a bit quicker. Those Armored Hounds are a bit of a pain, but we managed to get through them, and we still have the late Void Eyes to try and help out these Sabers. Luckily, they're not the highest level. One Scorpion manages to sit behind stuff, but you can see that it is taking still way, way, way too long to get through all of this. The good thing is the opponent doesn't have the best chaff gear, right? They have unranged Mustang, unranged Hounds, so once we get rid of that, it's just the Raidens, and they can kind of chaff clear, but it takes an awful long time. And so we do manage to win here, but only by a very, very slim margin. There's not many units remaining, so the damage we're going to deal is not fantastic. Still, it's a good recovery round, right? We've managed to kind of stabilize. We didn't take more damage. And now we get unit reinforcements. Sadly, here, it's not the best, and you can get these where the game doesn't really offer you anything great, right? Low-level Rhino, they're going to get one-shot by practically everything. Fire Badger, we already have Chaff and also gets countered by Raiden. Phoenix gets countered by Raiden unless it's high level, but these are all low level and we're dealing with high level Raidens on the opponent's side. That is not going to do the job. And Phantom Ray shows up again, gets countered by Raiden. So nothing great, and even worse, I guess, is lots of deployments, so hard to sell. Now, it can be tricky to know this, right? I see this a lot, where people want to make use of the unit drop, and it's a good instinct to have, but sometimes there just isn't a good option. And low-level Phoenix into high-level Raiden is just not a winning matchup. So the idea here is to get more DPS, which is absolutely correct. You need more DPS, but Phoenixes are just not going to get the job done here. And yeah, you're going to see that we kind of get caught in this kind of trap where we pick the unit drop, we don't have the field recovery, we picked something that's going to be hard to sell, and we invest more into the unit because we want to try and have it do something. And it's correct that if you want to have Phoenixes do something at this stage of the game, they absolutely need range. But even if they connect with the enemy Raiden, they got to get through 55,000 hit points. When you deal 3,000 hit points or 3,000 damage every 3.5 seconds, that's going to take way too long. And they're not going to connect that easily because, you know, the front line is a bit scary. Now, opponent gets a pretty decent drop out of this because they realize that their chaff clear isn't great, and they fix it by going range and napalm on the Badger drop. So this drop, absolutely, Allright did not get anything good. Nothing that's very sellable, nothing that makes the board better. It's just a bit of a rough situation. But sometimes that's how it's going to be, right? And we now tech the Void Eyes a little bit more. It's a cheap tech. Suppression Shot is very good. I wouldn't do it at this point, though. Again, DPS is the main kind of problem. I've mentioned Melter before. I still think Melter here would be decent. We take levels on the Scorpions. That will help if we can keep them alive. We picked up Phoenix, which I think is just a little bit too low level, but we'll have to see. There is still that oil available on the tower. I think I would try and use it, but now things are getting a little bit scary with the opponent's Raidens being very high level and Fork now being picked up as well, you know, boosting that damage even further. Opponent also starting to staircase very nicely onto that right side. I think that side was attackable a bit earlier in the game, specifically on that round. We put the crawler there, but now it's starting to get a little bit tricky, right? And here you're going to see that that napalm is going to do a very good job, not of clearing the Mustangs. The Mustangs are all still alive because they have range, but of clearing the chaff. And because all of the units are so far forward, right, from that early game play, which worked out well then, but now you get to see the repercussions of that. As soon as the little bit of chaff that's up front dies, you get insta-locked. And because the late chaff can't arrive quickly enough or gets burnt by the latent fire, you lose your front line very quickly, even if it has a super heavy armor on a Vulcan. And so very, very rough round there. Tons of damage taken. Now we get round 9, though, with some spells. Mobilized Battleship, Orbital Bombardment, perhaps a way to get back into the game. Orbital, though, is also very good for the opponent with all of these Mustangs. So absolutely need to get those bubbles. Very good play there. And this is very rough, especially after going into Phoenix. Level 1 Phoenix gets one-shot by orbitals. And yeah, okay. Because of that, we should not go for EMP. If we could land the EMP, absolutely would be very good into the Raidens. They are kind of tech-reliant as a unit. But with orbitals showing up, and it should be expected that opponents pick spells this late, you generally should, because of their impact, your Phoenixes are very, very likely to die here. They would need to dodge every single orbital because, once again, one is enough to kill them. I do like this crawler up front. That is a good play, right? Realizing that, hey, if the opponent locks onto these barriers immediately because the chaff is not really poking out, at least not over here, I might instantly lose the barrier and lose a whole bunch of my ground units to the orbital. You want to have the shields live for as long as possible. So that is a nice play. Opponents just buys more Raidens in this scenario, and we definitely should loan. Sprinkler gets picked up, which I guess is a response to Napalm. This is again a bit of a knowledge check. Napalm just doesn't really get countered by Sprinkler in most scenarios. It's not worth teching for. What should you do against it? That is a good question. Napalm is just very, very, very good late game, but Sprinkler is just not really something worth doing. You just kind of need to tank the Napalm and live with it, I guess. There are ways of going for something like Subterranean Blitz, double defense enhancement. Finally, we grab one enhancement. Again, at this stage, you would want 2. You could arguably even want 3. Or, I mean, I guess the first and the second attack and defense enhancements should have been taken by now. The first, definitely. The second ones, potentially. I think they are very good to pick up this late. But, yeah, things here just not going well, right? The barriers got taken down pretty rapidly. Only one Phoenix pack manages to survive, and even though we do have the EMP against the field maintenance and maybe the Raidens, none of it manages to connect, and that is going to be the end of this game. So I think in general this game has a whole lot of different concepts that are common mistakes at the mid-range, right? Around 1300, 1350 MMR range, which is overall the composition makes sense, right? The chaff is there. It's well positioned. Round 1, I think, looks fantastic in terms of the deployment. I have to go to round 2 here. This is all perfectly fine, but there are maybe some slight mistakes in terms of, well, like optimizing your board and knowing the matchups. In this case, you're a giant spec. Your opponent has nothing but chaff. That should scream, go Vulcan, right? Even on round 2, if you could. Here it's a bit tough because there's the Wasp Swarm to deal with, but don't stress about it too much. Even if you could even like not even react to it. So what if you lose a round? You have 4,600 hit points, right? Early round doesn't matter that much, especially if you lose it to a spell. Your opponent invested money into that. You can just not spend that money on a spell and spend it on your board instead. And then next round, you likely will win because you have 100 extra resources to spend, right? This early on in the game. Plus you're a giant spec, so you get the unlock of the Vulcan for free. You can go for this play though. You know, it's not my ideal thing. I think Mustang, you have to realize, is not very good into Crawler, Hound, Sledgehammer, Arclight. It's not good into those type of units. So it's not going to help out too much. Yes, you will need anti-air, but it's okay to kind of run some risks here. You need other stuff as well. And yeah, I think playing around the specialist here is very important. So round 3, when we get unit reinforcements, this has been a trend throughout the entire game. What to do when there really aren't the best unit reinforcements. In this case, very few, actually none of the unit reinforcements were good for Allright. They were pretty good for the opponent, but they were not that good here. So when that happens, it's when you need to really go for that field recovery button. In the first place, right, whenever you're defending symmetrically and your opponent is attacking asymmetrically, this button is mandatory, absolutely mandatory, right? Start selling some stuff on your other side of the board, right, the weak side of the opponent, unless you have some good reason to try and push in. But with Sledgehammer and Hound this far back, that's going to take way too long, typically. So sell out of the building first, right, get that money back, and then start selling some other stuff, like these bad unit drops, right? If you sell a building here, you can then go for something like a Phantom play right on round 2. Phantom, Crawler there, and try and pressure, and then play for a Vulcan maybe on the next round. Or you can try and sell now and buy a Vulcan immediately. All of those plays are fine. I'll take like the round here to kind of show you what I mean, right? So, oh hey, the drops are bad. Okay, well, I haven't gotten the field recovery button yet, but I'm going to go for Phantom Ray, right? Wasp makes no sense. Void Eye is too vulnerable to Raiden because of my board state. And Steel Ball, same thing. So we're going to take this. We're going to go for an aggressive play on that right side because it is relatively open. We can go for a Crawler over there. We are going to start selling, right? Get that field recovery button available. So we now have, well, just recovered the cost of that. Next round, we plan to sell this and then use those resources for a Vulcan on the left side. Because we're going to go Vulcan, very common play, get that oil, right? Use the 2 turns. Oil sticks around for 2 rounds if it's not ignited. So this round, we get the slow benefit. Next round, we buy a Vulcan, light it on fire. That's 2 rounds where you're likely going to be winning, especially if you're going for this type of an aggressive move. And, I mean, by that point, you have free reign now, right, on what you want to do. This sledgehammer level, not worth it. Just not worth it. It's not doing anything. It likely will get sold at some point. Or it just can stay there to just prevent your opponent from counterattacking, but not worth leveling into. Now you have so much money, right, to do whatever you want. You can pick another sledgehammer if you want to. You can unlock something like a marksman if you are a bit afraid of anti-air. You can buy another Mustang if you want to. It's just, overall, you can go for a very solid play, right? I think I would probably do something like this. Buy another sledgehammer. Get another Crawler. And there you go, right? Solid board. Opponent goes for steel balls. That's okay. He doesn't run armor. And you know that your Vulcan next round will do amazing, right? You get the tower. You went for that Crawler play, but you substantiated it with an actual threat on the tower. There's no point pulling units if it doesn't achieve anything, right? And the round here should just be decent. You might not win by a massive margin, but you've set up very, very convincingly for round number 4, where you then get to go into your actual composition, make use of your specialist, and yeah, crush your opponent, right? Stabilize very, very quickly. So that would have been my play. Then sell that Phantom, as I said, go for Vulcan, light the oil on fire. From there on out, you can play Vulcan Melter, something along those lines, which is kind of the next, I guess, portion of this game. Let's say that we get to this stage, second unit drop comes around. If we take over in that spot, what should you have done? So Sabertooth is very scary, right? None of the drops really make sense. Let's say we go for Scorpion. Again, ideally here you would have the field recovery button already available because, well, you would have a bit more money. Now you need to, right, recover some of that cost, so you only get 200. But you can do the same thing, right? You pull with that Scorpion. We put the Wasp over here to try and threaten the tower. You do need to be a bit wary of the enemy Wasp Swarm, so let's put that Mustang over there. And let's use our specialist, right? We picked efficient giant manufacturing. We need 4 giants for that to make profit. 3 to just break even, but it's not worth going down in resources to break even, so we want profit. The way that we achieve that is by actually building the units, right, that are going to be able to kill the enemy Raidens. So let's do that. Let's also use the oil, since we have that available still. We could even put it a little bit further back, to be honest. Try and really burn the enemy units. I think this level would be important. I think range on the melting point probably would help as well. We could also go for another Vulcan, but we're using oil in this case. I think another deployment would be somewhat sensible, but I really want the range on the melting point, so I think I'm just going to go for that, and then we're going to level this Mustang, so it's level 3. I think this is just a little bit more sensible. Another problem there is that the Vulcan has no techs, which is something that should be addressed at some point, but I'm trying to kind of play with well, what we have right now. So you can see the melting point, right, does the double job of protecting against Sabertooth, which you're very happy with to see, right? Your opponent invested into a tech for it as well, which is not going to do anything into melting point, and you manage to crush, right? You keep pressuring that right side tower. If your opponent is not using any resources to defend it, have a go, right? Have a go at it, especially if the unit drops aren't good for you. More reason to use them on the other side of the field. go for a play there, pull away his stuff, get his tower, punish him, right? He's not allowed to push in here without doing anything over here, without leveling his tower. That is one of the things that you need to do if you're defending, right? Punish the opponent a little bit. Have them use resources over here, because if they use resources over here, there's less to deal with on the left side. Makes your job a bit easier. I think you can probably win on like round 8 as well, but then things start to get a bit tricky, right? Because of this kind of snowball effect of trying to make do with units that won't do too much for you does put you in a worse and worse spot the longer the game goes on. That's kind of how this composition building works. But I think even here, we may be able to get away with some stuff. Keep in mind, like, we took a ton of damage, like 2,500 damage, I think, this round. So if we can somehow try and prevent that from being a thing, we'd be in a better spot. I would probably take the Phantoms here because they're the easiest to sell across, you know, multiple rounds. We could go for an aggressive play. I'm not sure if it gets in. In fact, I think it probably doesn't, but we can try nonetheless. Maybe go for something like a mobile beacon. Again, you will see me trying to pressure this tower a whole bunch, especially in these scenarios where you feel like you're behind. Same thing again, right? Oil this round as well, since it hasn't been used. I would just try and go for it. And I would sell as well. This feels a bit bad because there's already been range on the Scorpions, but they're not doing that much. They're really not doing that much. So it's much better here to just invest in what we need, which would be the melting points. I think we even need to go for level 2 melting points here. I'm going to elite recruit them. One over here, and then one maybe over here to try and kind of target these Raidens that are across them. Range is absolutely necessary. Temp range, I think, important as well. And, I mean, that's just kind of the round, I think. Temp speed, I guess, could help as well. Not exactly sure. We can try this. I'm not convinced this is going to be a winning move. The right side gets cleared pretty easily. It's unlikely that these Phantoms get in. But, you know, if we can at least prevent ourselves from taking 2k damage, we'd be in a better spot here than, well, we normally would have been. And we can try and at least stabilize the board from there. Actually, looks like we still do end up winning. Yeah, so having the melting points helps tremendously there. And you can still get a round win, even this late, by using the specialist and kind of trying to counter what Raiden struggle with, right? That level 1 Raiden there, it tickles level 2 melting points. So that would have been, I think, my general recommendations this game. Either way, I hope that this was helpful. I hope that you guys like this format. If you do, please leave a like. Let me know down in the comments what you think about this. You know, are these topics and things that you see that you struggle with yourself? Are you happy that I'm trying to kind of go over them in this fashion? Is it too long a format or just right? Be sure to let me know. If you want to stay up to date on latest content, please consider subscribing. And if you want to see me play live, check me out on Twitch. With that being said, take care, guys, and see you in the next video. Bye-bye.